call you up. Dear friends, thank you all for coming, being here to give our respects to Robert Hersh. In Louise's fashion, she asked that I give her the opportunity to speak first. Louise?
I didn't know if I'd be able to speak at all. I wrote out or spoke to, this is Cantor Barnoy. Where is he now? There he is. He's our cantor, and he will be officiating today. And I discussed with him things that I wanted to say because I didn't think I'd be able to say it. So the only thing that I would say is that Bob and I both appreciate your being here and the amazing, overwhelming support and love and admiration that he's gotten from everybody. How lucky we are with our family and our friends and our phenomenal caregivers. He was a most fortunate man. So thank you all very, very much for coming. Now I'll let the cantor. Thank you. I'll go down with this thing. Where's Bob? Is there? I'll go down with Roger. Roger back.
I'm not sure I got that joke, but as long as all of you did, then great. Is Roger Bannister some track and field star? Is that what it... Now it makes sense. Okay. We'd like to summon God's love and support at this moment by reading some Psalms. These Psalms are from our book of Psalms, which has 150 Psalms, and thankfully we won't read them all today, but we'll read a couple. And the Psalms that are chosen for a moment like this are really in two categories. One is the category of Psalms that teaches us how to live a good life, teaches us about the fragility of our life, and that every day is counted, and that we should make the most of every day and be good people. Something that we also learned from Bob's life, as we'll see as we describe and paint a picture of his life together. So this is Psalm 1. אשרי האיש אשר הלך בעצת השם ודרך חטאים לא עמד ובמוצאיו רשעים לא ישב וקים בתורת אדוני חפצו ותורתו יגיע יומם ולילה ויכה את שתול על פלגי מים אשר פיו ייתם בעתו ויעלה לו ייבול וכל אשר יעשה יצליח לא כן על שם כי אם כמות אשר תדפנו רוח על כן לא יקום מרשעים במשפט וחטאים ביד הצדיקים כי יודע אדוני דרך צדיקים ודרך רשעים תאבד. Happy is the one who has not followed the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the path of sinners, nor sat in the company of the scornful. Rather, that one's delight is in the teachings of the Lord, meditating in God's teachings day and night, and will be like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in season, whose leaf will not wither, and whatever that one does prospers. Not so the wicked, who are the like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked shall not survive judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord loves the way of the righteous, and the way of the wicked is doomed. Psalm 15. מזמור לדוד, אדוני, מי יגור בי הולך המשכון בהר קודשך. הולך תמים ופועל צדק ודובר אמת בלבבו. לא רגל לשונו לא אסר לרעהו רעה וחרפה לא נשא על קרובו. לא עשה לרעהו רעה נבזה בעיניו נמאס ואת יראי אדוני יכבד נשבע להרע ולא ימיר. כספו לא נתן בנשך ושוחד ענקי לא לקח עושה אלה לא ימות לעולם. A song left for us by King David. Lord, who may sojourn in your tent? Who may dwell on your holy mountain? One who walks in purity, does what is righteous, and speaks the truth from their heart. Who has no slander on their tongue, nor has done a harm to any fellow, nor casts any disgrace towards their neighbor. In whose eyes a contemptible person is repulsive, but who honors those who are in awe of the Lord, who swears truthfully even to personal hurt and never retracts their word. One who does these things shall never falter. The other category of Psalms are the ones that teach us that God offers us comfort in these moments. And such comfort is found in Psalm 23. Many of us are familiar with this psalm. In it we find the words, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for God is with me. מזמור לדוד, אדוני רואי לא אחסר, בנודה שירביצני על מי מנוחות ינהלני. נפשי ישובב ינחני במעגלי צדק למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות לא ירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צוררי. דשנת בשם ראשי כוסי רוויה. אך טוב החסד ירפוני כל ימי חיי. ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Bob and Louise and the family have been with us at Temple Bet Shalom for many, many years. I've been here at Temple Bet Shalom for 22 years. Is that many, many years? Okay, long enough to get to know Bob and Louise. And I can tell you, they are lovely, amazing people, the whole family. And yesterday we had an opportunity, a few moments to sit together and reminisce about Bob. And I learned things about Bob I actually never knew. I know Louise much better. She's very active here in sisterhood. And Bob, you know, he was busy with track and field, I hear. So here's a little bit about Bob. Bob was born in 1940 in Brooklyn. If you knew him at all or even knew anything about him, you would know that his first love, going back to his childhood, was a sport of track and field. It was his life and a lifelong passion. Bob attended Midwood High School, Columbia College, and then Harvard Law School. After receiving his law degree, Bob practiced corporate law for 40 years, but still his true passion was volunteering his time and his talent to the sport of track and field. In childhood, Bob was first a fan of baseball. However, at the age of 12, Bob's father took him to a track and field meet, and that changed his life. He fell in love with the sport, and he became the manager of the track and field team at his high school and later at Columbia. You know, Bob was not necessarily a fit athlete, but he loved the sport just as much, maybe more, than those athletes who took part in it. He held a position as a senior editor at Track and Field magazine, and he was best known as a stadium announcer for track and field at all the Olympics going back to 1984, various indoor track meets around the country. His beautiful home, which I had an opportunity, of course, to visit yesterday, is adorned everywhere with posters of track meets and other track and field memorabilia, including right on the table in front of me is a beautiful gold replica of the 2008 Beijing Olympics National Stadium, known to all of us as the Bird's Nest. Bob went on to be a valued member of the board that guided the sport and eventually became its second in command, the vice president. Everyone lovingly called him the commish. In 2018, Bob was in his glory when he was inducted into the Track and Field Hall of Fame in Columbus, Ohio. The entire family joined him for that momentous occasion, which was a crowning achievement for Bob. Vincent Lanana, president of the USA Track and Field, is here today. He's here to honor Bob. I'd like to invite him forward to say a few words about Bob. Thank you.
Good morning. As introduced, I'm Vin Lanana, president of USA Track and Field. Looking around in the synagogue today, I see so many of his friends here. I thought, actually, Louise, we were going to have our annual meeting here. Bob Hersh was a respected statistician, a meticulous record keeper, a diehard track and field aficionado, but most importantly, for those of us who know him well, he is a most respected historian. I heard Bob Hersh's voice long before I actually met him. I was running at the Milrose Games as a freshman on a 2-mile relay in Madison Square Garden. It was a leadoff leg. And I was dying out coming down the last straightaway. I was running for CW Post College. It was a below average team and a below average leadoff leg. And as I finished the race and I was dying down the last straightaway, and I fell to my knees in the requisite position, hands on knees, trying to recover, and I heard a distinguished voice. It was a voice that I heard in Madison Square Garden, shushing the crowd before the big events in a packed stadium. I actually didn't meet Bob until several years later when I started coaching, and he tutored me on the great performances from the history of the NCAA meets that he attended for decades. And for decades, many of us depended upon Bob to provide insights on records, on rules, all things track and field, but especially on our history. I listened to his voice at the Olympic Games and at the World Championships as he was the English voice. He guided, for me personally, he guided our Eugene local organizing committee through the bidding for the World Championships recently held in the United States for the first time. But that wasn't the first time that Bob helped. 3 years earlier, he studied the local organizing committee's 2016 World Indoor Championship bid documents, and we held the 2016 World Championships in Portland. He provided the Bob Hersh advice as our track team bid for the World Junior Championship years before that. I remember his wise words of caution. He called me one afternoon and he said, Eugene was the only bidder for the 2014 World Junior Championship. It seemed like a done deal. We were overconfident. But in Bob's usual words of caution, he said, although Eugene is the only bidder, do not pop the champagne cork just yet. So I wondered about that. As an accomplished attorney, he always wanted to be prepared for the unexpected. We depended on Bob to get it right, to do the right thing, and to guide our precious sport. He and Louise are always there, ready to assist, whenever, wherever, however possible. I lost a dear friend. Long Island lost a great leader, a volunteer. The national body lost someone who's guided our organization for years. Global athletics lost a friend. But his legacy will be etched in the history of our sport. The history of our sport is exactly where Bob Hersh's name deserves to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I noticed before, as I was walking amongst the crowd outside in the lobby, that there are many members of this association, the track and field. You can tell they are all wearing the same emblem. To represent them also is here Duffy Mahoney. He is Chief of Sport Performance, and he came on their behalf and on behalf of the sport to make a presentation in honor of Bob.
Good morning, everyone. Just a quick history. I'm a Brooklyn boy. Bob went to Midwood High School. I went to Bishop Loughlin, ran track at the Armory when I first heard those beautiful tones of Bob the announcer. I then went on to coach at Long Beach High School for a number of years. Again, meeting Bob regularly at the Armory and at the Garden. I then took over in '80 as the head coach at St. John's University. Again, Bob was ever present. My first real meeting with Bob, for those in the track and field community, Louise and some of your family, was at Mama Leone's in 1978 at the Indoor Metropolitan Track Sports Riders Luncheons, held every Monday during the indoor season. And the commish was always there to report on the weekend's events and to let everybody in the track and field world know what was going on. I then took over, God bless, 33 years ago with USA Track and Field as a high performance director and am now chief of sport performance. So again, for 40-something years, Bob's presence and Bob's friendship and professional relationships have been there for me and for everybody. I don't have to talk about his wonderful voice and being the announcer of the Olympic Games, World Championships, so many indoor meets in the Mobile Grand Prix Series back in the 70s and the 80s. Then Judy Schmertz and Howard and their family supported that wonderful circuit. Bob was the architect and the rules man and the record keeper of the circuit. He then went on, as we now know, and Willie Banks is here, our representative to World Athletics, formerly the IAAF, and Bob went on to a position of prominence, rising all the way to that senior vice president's level. He is a giant in the sport, no doubt about it, and will be remembered, as Vin Lynette just said, forever, around the world, globally, nationally, and here in New York in our very special family of track and field crazies in the New York metropolitan area. So with that, I'm honored to read a proclamation on behalf of President Lanana, Chairman of our board, Mike Connolly, and CEO Max Siegel. Proclamation of USA Track and Field in recognition of the life of Bob Hersh. Whereas Bob Hersh was a beloved contributor in the sport of track and field, and whereas Bob Hersh served as an official, public address announcer, writer, and administrator over a span of more than 60 years, and whereas Bob Hersh served various roles with the Athletics Congress and USA Track and Field as the Records Committee Chair, the Rules Committee Chair, and General Counsel, and was a board member from 1981 to 2015. And whereas Bob Hersh served as an IF Council member and rose to Senior Vice President in 2011, the highest position at the sport's global governing body ever held by an American. In that role, he served as a technical delegate at the Olympics and the IF World Championship events. And whereas Bob Hersh worked to develop the USA Mobile Indoor Grand Prix, which brought the major U.S. events together in a series that provided prize money for athletes, the IF soon followed with an indoor Grand Prix circuit of its own on the world level. He also served as a senior editor for Track and Field News magazine for many years. And whereas Bob Hersh was a National Track and Field Hall of Fame inductee and was USA Track and Field's Geigengack Award winner in 1997, and twice received our President's Awards, he played an integral role in the formation of the Athletics Congress, the changeover to USA Track and Field, and the professionalism of track and field worldwide. And be it hereby proclaimed on this January 20th, 2023, USA Track and Field honors Bob Hersh and lauds his legacy to athletics in the state of New York, to USA Track and Field, and to the entire sport. Thank you. Louise, thank you.
Thank you. That's a beautiful and meaningful proclamation. So you heard Duffy speak about Bob's voice. Now, I had never heard Bob announce anything. I really never followed track and field. I'm not one of those people who follows the Olympics that much. I don't know. Some people do, some people don't. I'm not one of those. So I never really followed track and field. Unlike watching a baseball game or a football game, it's not something that you just kind of find yourself watching on TV. Yes, of course, you'll take me, yes, but I have to agree to it. However, the family did send me a couple of videos of Bob announcing a track meet, and I think, well, I guess it was in the Olympics. And, well, there it was, that voice, you know, that you kind of, even when you listen to a baseball game or a football game, there's always, you know, the voice of their announcers, and it's always a very well-trained and mellifluous voice that you are listening to, and boy, Bob really had a great voice. So we can appreciate that. You know, another way, as I found out when I was at their house, that his passion for the game manifested itself is he had an inability to throw any item out that had to do with track and field. I guess by you laughing, you already knew this. Yeah, as I said, his house, all around, wherever you look, is filled with memorabilia of the game. And as the family told me, he kept thousands of clippings from track meets going back 50 years and more. Never threw anything out. It was all so endearing to him. If I can switch gears a little bit, many of you are aware that Bob had a previous marriage to his beloved Louise, But in 1984, he met Louise, and they married, and for the next 39 years until today, she was his guiding light and companion, supported him and cheered him on, traveling with him around the world so that he could enjoy his passion for track and field. And they raised this beautiful family together. Bob had a child from his previous marriage, if I'm correct, right? There you are, Lauren. I mean, it's kind of nice that you're sitting on the other side, but I know you're all together. But Bob made sure that the families melded together, and to Bob, all his children were his children, without distinguishing who they were born to. And of course, it goes without saying how he felt about and adored his grandchildren. His granddaughters, Dylan, Darren, and Devin, recalled to me how impressed they were that he was able to remember any date that ever had a track meet. He had an encyclopedic mind. It was so impressive to remember all those facts from the sport. And they truly enjoyed being with him at the Track and Field Hall of Fame for his induction. They were so proud of him. And Dylan remembers that when she ran track for her high school, Bob and Louise would come to the meets and all the officials would recognize Bob. They'd be awed by his presence. So, to sort of represent the family, I'm going to ask his son Phil to come forward and share some personal thoughts about Bob.
Thank you. Girls are up here for moral support. Thank you all for coming. You know, as other people have said, the outreach and the support literally from all around the world has been tremendous. As you know, or I was going to say we'll find out, but apparently we've all found out that track and field lost an invaluable asset on Wednesday. But separately to track and field, we lost an amazing father, grandfather, brother, uncle, and a loving and supportive husband. But we just like to call him Bob. Sort of funny, the last time I spoke from this bima was at my bar mitzvah in 1984. And by the way, the temple looks exactly the same. But it was roughly 1 month after my mother married Bob, and he became a significant part of our lives. My brother and I quickly came to learn that Bob at times could be a little formal. I don't recall seeing him leave the house without a sports jacket for years. Always a strict grammarian and statistician. If playing Scrabble, we were never allowed to use the Scrabble dictionary. It wasn't good enough. Words only had to be in the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. One time, Bob was particularly disturbed when I came home with 2% milk instead of 1% milk. I said, Bob, what's the big deal? It's a 1% difference. He fumed. It's 100% difference. It was obvious then, and continued on, that Bob was very smart. He knew almost all the answers to Jeopardy and would often tape it to make sure he wouldn't miss an episode. As you've heard, he had an amazing mind, and you know, my friends and I used to play party games where you could give Bob a date, March 8th, 2042. Bob would take off his glasses, squint his eyes like his brain was hurting, and come back and say, Saturday. As you know, he's had a love or maybe an obsession with track and field. I had written some stuff, but I don't need to go over it because you've heard it or whatever, but from stadium announcer of various things to a brilliant official rising to the highest position that an American has ever held on the international scene. And as well, as you said, we were all very excited to see him inducted. The whole family was there at the USA Track and Field Hall of Fame. In track and field, he was also a little formal and a perfectionist. officiating meets in suits in the Millrose games in a tuxedo. He carried around a pocket tape recorder so that when new and upcoming athletes were on the scene, he would go up to them and ask them to pronounce their name into the tape recorder to make sure that he pronounced their name correctly as they were running. There's been a lot of stuff online about favorite lines that Bob had said. I think you mentioned shushing the crowd. People said, "This is the Wanamaker Mile." For me, the one that I think is probably the oddest thing I ever heard announced at Madison Square Garden was, "And now they turn for the anti-penultimate lap." No idea what lap it was. As Josh and I grew and Lauren grew, we saw the less formal, fun side of Bob. First, which he may regret, he introduced us to some of his closer track and field friends. And soon we were privy to a lot of jokes which are not worthy of repeating here. One time Bob had work. I was off from school. He had a friend staying with us, and he said, "Phil, can you please entertain my friend?" I said, "Sure, no problem." Bob came home from work. We weren't home yet. Suffice to say, we learned how to eat. A friend of mine and Bob's friend learned how to eat wasabi and drink sake out of a wooden glass from about 1 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I also remember when the Nintendo console game came out, Bob scoffed at Josh and I for wasting our time playing. Soon after, on weekends, when I would come home late, 12, 1 o'clock, there Bob would be sitting in his underwear, an empty bottle of Grolsch next to him, trying desperately to get to the next level on Super Mario Brothers. We always went to the Penn relays. When I was in law school at Penn, it was harder for me to go because it was always right around finals week. So I would go to a couple events. Bob and Louise would go out for dinner, and then we would meet for brunch or something the next morning. I remember one year, after one of those nights, Bob showed up looking a little weary-eyed. And I said, "Well, where were you?" And my mom told me that they decided to go to one of the athletic fraternity parties, and the entire track team was there. They all knew Bob by look and by his voice, made him drink a lot of beer out of the keg, but thankfully for everybody, Bob chose not to participate in the naked beer run across campus. Once grandkids came into the picture, Bob softened even more. He had a huge smile on his face, and every time he saw them, they loved spending time with him too. He even missed part of a track event in Monaco for Dylan's bat mitzvah. He met his cancer diagnosis with the same courage and passion and positive attitude that he lived his life, outliving his life expectancy by over 1.5 years. It was hard to watch such a man decline rapidly, but he did so with grace and humor and strength. In the epitome of Bob, in the last week, his doctors were having a very hard time rousing him and getting him to respond. Louise said, "No problem," and yelled at Bob, "What's the capital of Burkina Faso?" To the doctor's shock, Bob opened his eyes and said, "Ouagadougou." Throughout the course of our lives, Bob showed us the value of hard work and passion for sport, life, and family. He instilled in us a love of food, drink, and travel, and even track and field. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Phil sort of spoke on behalf of the family. However, Josh and Lauren also expressed their thoughts to me and would like for me to read on their behalf. Josh remembered how he learned the value of hard work and his thirst for knowledge from his dad. They played Trivial Pursuit together, and Bob was just brilliant. He was knowledgeable about everything. He loved music and fine arts. He was very particular about the operas that he either loved or hated. Joshua loved to travel with his dad all over the world, almost always for track meets. They were also kindred-spirited foodies, seeking out the best restaurants everywhere where they traveled to. Bob actually made it to all 50 states in the U.S. and every continent on the planet, thanks to his love and passion for the sport of track and field. And during the years he worked as a lawyer, he would travel almost every weekend to those track meets. But when he retired, well, that became a full-time occupation. And he ascended to the very heights of that field, becoming, as you heard, the number 2 person, the vice president. And last night I received an email with the following reminiscence from Bob's youngest daughter, Lauren. There was also a note from his nephew, Joe Garfine. I'd like to read them both to you now. Am I right? Niece, sorry. Niece Joe. This is from Lauren. My father was one of the smartest and most hardworking and most dedicated men I ever met. Growing up, he worked as an attorney and track and field official, all while taking care of his family. He really did understand the concept of having a work-life balance, and he taught me to do the same. He was passionate about everything he did, and I loved to see him become animated when he got excited about anything. My dad also had a great moral sense, working hard to change any errors he may have made, ensuring they never happened again, and instilling those lessons in others. His love of food and wine is something I have also taken with me. He taught me to try everything more than once, because your taste buds change through your life. Some of my best memories of him have been sharing food at different restaurants, and this is probably what I will miss the most about him. My father loved his grandchildren, and even though most of them weren't blood-related, he still treated them as such. I will never forget how excited he was for me to have my daughter, Maddie Lynn. They told me it was Maddie Lynn, but okay, whatever. Madeline. I love this. As long as you fight it out. Madeline. His face and demeanor immediately lightened as soon as she entered the room. Even though his time with her was short. By the way, she's 1 year and 7 months, right? 17 months, yeah. It still left an impact, and from now on, my husband and I will tell her stories about her grandfather until she's sick of hearing them. He leaves behind an incredible legacy. And this is from niece Joe Garfine. For my entire life, I looked up to my Uncle Bob. I always thought he was one of the kindest and most interesting people I'd ever had the honor of knowing. I used to brag to my friends that my very cool uncle was the voice inside the stadium announcing track and field at the Olympics for many years. I will never forget when our family had the opportunity to attend the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles. Listening to the iconic voice reverberating throughout the massive Memorial Coliseum is a memory I'll never forget and will cherish forever. We love and will miss you, Uncle Bob. Thank you both for those reminiscences. Bob was a fighter. He was diagnosed, as many of you know, with a very aggressive brain tumor, and even though he was given just a few months to live, well, he lasted more than 2 years in spite of that diagnosis because he was a fighter. Bob was loved, respected, admired by everyone. And he was world famous in the track and field circles, and everyone in that world called him the commish, as you heard. And he wrote the rules. Bob was instrumental in ratifying world records and meet winners. So in that respect, well, he held a position of power and influence. And to be honest, he loved that. Bob had a sense of integrity, so he was trusted. Louise recalled that she had heard from many track and field participants through the years how they loved to hear him announce the meets, and they were calmed by his voice before they started their run. He was a wonderful brother, Carolyn, a loving husband, a doting father who taught his family and his friends by word and by example. Okay. All right. So Louise started, and his sister Carolyn is going to just finish with something she really wanted to tell you.
I just wanted to briefly say, Bob has crossed the finish line with his family and friends around him. We loved him. We will miss him. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. So in conclusion, we all have the opportunity to spend a few years on this earth. And we all have the opportunity to make the best of our lives in those years we are here. And from what I learned about Bob, well, Bob really made the most of every day. He was passionate. He lived his passions. He traveled the world. He raised an amazing family. Has so many friends who admire and love him. Who of us wouldn't want to leave that legacy behind when we go? So we ask God to merit Bob his place in the next world, to bind his soul in the bond of eternal life. Tehi nishmato tzura b'tzor hechayim. Before we conclude the service with the memorial prayer, we just want to make an announcement, of course, that the burial is going to follow this service at Beth Moses Cemetery. If you're joining the procession, we ask you to put on your hazard lights so that everyone on the highways know you're part of the procession and respect you. Shiva will be observed. Of course, it begins today after the funeral. However, Friday night being the beginning of Shabbat, the Sabbath, there is no mourning allowed on the Sabbath day itself, and therefore there will only be a short opportunity, short window today for the mourners to actually sit Shiva and have people come over. So technically the family has asked that visitations should begin Saturday evening from 6 to 9. And there will be a service there at 7:30. And this is at the home of Louise and Bob. Also on Sunday and Monday from 1 to 4, and then again from 6 to 9, with the services at 8 o'clock. If you'd like to make any donations in honor and memory of Bob, the family has asked that you make those donations to either the USA Track and Field Foundation or to Temple Beth Shalom, or any other charity of your choice. Please rise. רחמים שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, אתני שמות ראובן בן יצחק ואסתר שהלך לעולמו. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו, לכן בעל הרחמים הסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח ושלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper repose on the sheltering wings of your presence, and the lofty levels of the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of Reuven ben Yitzchak the Esther, Robert Michael the Commish Hersh, who has gone to his world, and for whose memory we pray. May his repose be in paradise. May the Master of Compassion bring him under the cover of God's wings and bind his soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be his heritage. May he repose on his resting place in peace. And let us say Amen. Thank you. We ask that you let the family follow the casket, after which you can all return to your cars.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're coming with us to the cemetery, we ask you please have your hazards and headlights on. We'll be lining up by the exit in front of the temple. You'll see the hearse there and the limos there as well. If you have any questions, feel free to ask one of our directors, limo drivers, or hearse drivers on where to go. Thank you.